This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Tonight's already a few days before Tisha B'Av, already Zayin Av. And as we approach Tisha B'Av, as the period of the 3 weeks is coming to an end, we start to feel the period of the Avelos more and more intensely. And we start to try to awaken ourselves and feel in a more real sense the tzaros of the Churban and all the resultant difficulties that our nation has experienced over the last 2,000 years. And the tzara that is closest to our hearts and most recent in history is the Holocaust, which was only 70 years ago. And very hard to comprehend this period in history. And tonight is not a historical lecture, but we would like to discuss it from more of a halachic standpoint, to learn about some of the questions that were raised in those years of darkness. The fact that there were even Rabbanim around to ask questions to, that itself was a miracle. The truth is there weren't that many Rabbanim that you were able to ask halachic questions to. The fact that anybody could have the wherewithal and have the composure to ask a halachic shayla, that itself is a miracle. And we're going to deal with a number of questions. And the purpose of learning these questions and answers is not to say, well, how come they didn't do this or how come they didn't do that? That's not the purpose of the shiur. We can't even imagine how they woke up one morning, how they lived 1 hour, 1 minute under those conditions. We'd like to just get a feel for some of the things that they were thinking about, some of the things they were dealing with, and along the way maybe learn some very important halachic principles. Most of the shiur tonight comes from the set of Svarim, Sha'alos Mimamakim. Sha'alos Mimamakim was written by Rabbi Ephraim Oshri, one of the Lithuanian Rabbanim who lived in, he was in the Kovna ghetto, and one of the main addresses to halachic inquiries during those years of darkness. He wrote what is now 5 volumes of Sha'alos Mimamakim, where the most outlandish questions you cannot even dream of he was posed with during those years. And it's just mind-boggling some of the issues that he was able to respond to without Svarim, without Mar Makoimos at his disposal, and how he was able to direct and be moira derech to these those who were suffering under those conditions. The first question we would like to deal with tonight is from Chelak Hey, Siman Ches. And he tells us, it's very interesting, in some of the questions are longer than the answer. Because as part of the question, Rav Oshri gives us the background and the conditions that the person asking the question was enduring. So here he writes about how our world was darkened for us, how terrible our tragedy was. Ribon Shalom sent us, Charoin Apoy, Evra Vazam, Meshlachas Malachim Roim, terrible angels. And these, of course, he says, were their Germanim Harum, the cursed Nazis, the cursed Germans. And he explains how there was a certain allotment of work that they had to do in the ghetto. And then all of a sudden, one day, the Germans decided whatever the allotment was, well, you need to do that during the day, and another group needs to do the exact same thing at night. So the allotment of work had doubled on them. And says Rav Oshri, it was the eve of the most bitter day on the Jewish calendar, of that day of doom, the day that Yirmiyahu Hanavi cursed. Yirmiyahu Hanavi cursed the day that he was born. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, of course, was born on Tisha B'Av. He cursed the day of his birth. And Yirmiyahu Hanavi, putting a klala on that day for all of history now, Tisha B'Av is a day of disaster, a day of doom. And it's Tisha B'Av, the year 1942. And says Rav Oshri, we all gathered in the house. He gives us the address of Nafinovitz on the street, the Vitana 7 for Marev and for Eicha. And he says to mourn and bemoan the fate of all of those fallen throughout all the years of tzara, all the years of tragedy. And he says specifically to mourn and lament the destruction of Kehilas Lita, Gaonim, Gedolim, Tzadikim. And we were davening Mariv, and we were saying Eicha, and suddenly the doors of the Beis HaKnesses are stormed open, and the Nazis, the SS, Yamach Shemam, the Zichram, they run in, they start grabbing us, they start seizing us, they start beating us. They said, you haven't provided enough people for the Nacht shift, for the evening allotment, and they start grabbing us. We're off to the Air Force, we're off to the airport to do work on the airport. Actually, one time, I don't think I even ever said over the story here in the shul. One time, my grandfather and his brother, Heinach, Zechatzak Levracha, they were on a selection line with Mengele, and it was unclear what the fate would be, whether they were going to go L'chaim or the opposite. And at the last moment, they asking my grandfather, what do you do? So the last thing, my grandfather was a Rav. If you say you're a Rav, that's it. That's, your last moment here, Ba'olam Hazeh. And suddenly my grandfather's brother says, we are the best team of airplane mechanics in all of Europe. And he, in fact, was an expert, very technical, very, very adept with his hands. My grandfather probably never picked up a wrench in his life. And they were put to work on airplanes, and Uncle Henoch would be fixing the plane, and my grandfather would be making believe that he was doing something with the airplane. Apparently, a lot of the forced labor were at airports, and says Rav Ashi, they grabbed us, they seized us, and they said, Jews, what are you doing? You're praying for the future rebuilding of the temple. You have no future. There won't be a temple. And they grab us off to the airport to work the entire night. Now, they hadn't slept the whole day. They were doing the day shift. And they were working them the entire night for 12 hours. They were beating them. They were whipping them. And blood was coming forth from their bodies. And they were moaning, they were groaning on the day of doom, on the most tragic day of the year. Here they're being forced to work the whole night. But at least they had what to look forward to. At least they knew in the morning they would be replaced by the morning shift. And the morning comes and the Nazis said, today there is no morning shift. You're the morning shift. And after awaiting that hour the entire night, many of them collapsed. Many of them did not awaken. And they came to me, people came to me, are they allowed to fast? Should they fast? And sure enough, says Rav Ashi, well, I paskined that on that day they're not allowed to fast, but they need to eat the allotted portion of bread, and they need to eat the yusnak. What's the yusnak? The yusnak is the black porridge, the black soup that the Nazis provided them with. And sure enough, those who were able to endure this next day shift, they in fact did not fast that year on Tisha B'Av 1942. And then they come to Rav Ashri, who would even have the composure to ask such a question? We're going to be making Berchas Hamazon. We're going to be benching. Should we say Nachem in Berchas Hamazon? That was what was on their minds. After working the whole day, Erev Tisha B'Av, after working the whole night, Tisha B'Av, after working the whole day, Tisha B'Av, 36 hours. And they want to know, should they say Nachem in Berchas Hamazon? And that was the question presented to Rav Ashi. Well, let's just get a little background into the halachos of Nachem. If you look in Siman, Tav Kuf Nun Zayin, number 2 on your sheets, the Mechaber Paskins, on Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av Omer B'Bnei Yerushalayim, Nachem Hashem Elokeinu Savei L'Tzion. It says in Mechaber, on Tisha B'Av, when you daven Shmoneh Esrei, you say Nachem. The Mechaber does not say you say it in Shachris. He doesn't say you say it in Mariv. He doesn't say you say it in Mincha. Which means the Mechaber holds you just say Nachem. If you're davening Shmoneh Esrei on Tisha B'Av, the opinion of the Mechaber, by the way, based on the Rambam, is that you say Nachem in the Shmoneh Esrei. Comes the Ramah, and the Ramah says, no, v'haminug pashut, the established minug, she'ein oimrim Nachem, rak b'tfilas mincha shel Tisha B'Av. That you only say Nachem in Mincha. Why? The Ramah supplies the following svara. Because it's Mincha time that the Goyim ignited the Beis HaMikdash, and that is the time that we need the most Nechama. Now, very interestingly, the Mechaber is going like the opinion of the Rambam, and the Ramah almost none of the Rishonim say that you should only say Nachem mincha time. In fact, the Rosh writes that his entire life he was matmiya, he couldn't understand, why don't we say Nachem by all the Shemoneh Esreis of Tisha B'Av? And therefore, what do we do Lamaisa when it comes to Nachem and Shemoneh Esrei? Well, Sfaradim, says Rabbi Vadia Yosef, Sfaradim should follow, as always, the Shita of the Mechaber, and say Nachem in all of the Shemoneh Esreis of Tisha B'Av. And I know a lot of people, they're shaking their heads, but I don't do that. And by the way, the Chida also paskins in the Berchei Yosef that you must say Nachem in all the Shemoneh Esreis of Tisha B'Av. Many Sfaradim in this instance follow the Minhag of the Ramah, because the Ramah says V'haminhag hapashut. Rabbi Vadia says if you're a Sfardi, you follow the Mechaber, you follow the Rambam. The Ashkenazim are following the opinion of the Ramah, but the Ramah's basis is a little bit questionable. Why should it be that you only say Nachem by Mincha time? So now the issue is, what about Berchas Hamazon? Comes the Ramah, and the Ramah adds another halacha. Says Ramah, Misha achal b'Tisha B'Av. Anyone who eats Tisha B'Av, Yoimer Nachem b'Berchas Hamazon, you should say Nachem. Now the Ramah doesn't say only if you're eating a meal Mincha time. The Ramah just says a blanket statement. If you're eating on Tisha B'Av and you're going to bench, then you say Nachem. So therefore, says Rav Ashri, really, lahalacha, the correct thing to do would be to say Nachem in every Shemoneh Esrei of Tisha B'Av. Elamai minhag Ashkenaz is to follow the Ramah, and you only say Nachem when? By Mincha time. But when it comes to Berchas Hamazon, says Rav Ashri, you should go back and follow the Mechaber, you should go back and follow the Rosh, you should follow the Berkei Yosef, that any time you have a meal on Tisha B'Av, you should say Nachem. And that was the psak of Rav Ashri, that these Yidden who never had to break their fast, they were being tortured, they need to say Nachem in all of the Shemoneh Esrei, in all of the different Berchas Hamazons that they make on Tisha B'Av. By the way, just like the Mishnah Berurah paskins similarly, if you take a look at number 3, the Mishnah Berurah concurs. Says the Mishnah Berurah that if you're benching on Tisha B'Av, if anybody, if their wife is not fasting, by the way, the opinion of the Chafetz Chaim and the Be'er Halacha is that somebody whose wife is pregnant does not fast this year on Tisha B'Av, because it's a nidcha. Or if somebody is a choila, this year it's much more lenient on Tisha B'Av. But so if they would be eating and benching, then the halach would be they should say Nachem in all of the Berchas Hamazons. Now the Mishnah Berurah brings down, very interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah brings down the opinion of the Gra. The Gra doesn't like the idea of saying Nachem Bechlal and Berchas Hamazon. The Chachamim are not going to be masake in a special insert just in case you have to violate the fast. But nevertheless, the psak of the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah seems to agree is that if you're going to be benching on Tisha B'Av, the halacha is you would say Nachem, even if you're not eating Mincha time, even if you're eating Shachar's time, even if you're eating already the Marev, the night of Tisha B'Av. So this was question number 1 that we want to deal with this evening. Second question. This is Sha'alos Teshuvos Mimamakim, Chelek Aleph, Siman Beis. Okay, number 4 on your sheets. Says Rav Ashri, it's the 27th day of Elul, Tafshin Aleph, okay, 1941. And the Jews in the Kovna ghetto, again, they're working in the airport. And the Germans gave the following decree, that every day the Jews need to supply 1,000 workers to work at the airport. And what are we going to give you to eat? You get a little lechem, you get a little bread, and you get pigel soup. What's pigel soup? What's a pigel? You have a horse, he dropped dead, a car ran over him, his leg went flying out into the forest, so you take the foot of the horse and you throw it into the soup. Then you're driving down the road and there's a dead skunk on the side of the road, you throw it into the soup. Then there's a raccoon that's been laying in the forest, you have to chase away like 50 vultures on top of the raccoon, you throw it into the soup. That's what pigel soup is. That's what they gave them to eat. And says Rav Ashri, naturally there were many Yidden who could not bring themselves to eat this treifa soup. Now again, this is 1941. They weren't yet, this was just the beginning of the war in Lithuania. The Jews then, they were somewhat healthy. They hadn't been imprisoned that long yet. they were still considered begeder bari. They were still healthy. And the question is, were they allowed to eat this soup? After all, this was the only food that was being given to them as they were working. And then finally, says Rav Ashri, they came to him, bein keseh la'asar, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the question that was presented to Rav Ashri was, here it is, Aseres Yimei Tshuva, we don't even eat Pasakum Aseres Yimei Tshuva, can they eat the treifa soup to give them some sustenance? Says Rav Ashri, what's the question at hand? A very important question. And this is a tremendous piece of halacha that you need to know. And the question is, what is the definition of pikuach nefashos? Right now, these Yidden, they were strong, they were robust, they were healthy, they were not sickly, they had not been tormented. Nothing would happen to them today if they don't eat the soup. Maybe nothing would happen to them tomorrow if they don't eat the soup, or even the next day. But if they're going to refrain from eating today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day, it will lead to a weakening of their systems. It will cause them to become chalushim, which could bring on illness, and ultimately it could lead to a situation where sakanas nefashos. So the question is, how do you define halachically pikuach nefashos? Is pikuach nefashos here and now, right now, if I don't eat, the person, chas v'shalom, is in danger? Or is pikuach nefashos that if they don't eat, it could lead to a matzav that situation would weaken them, that it could bring to endangering their life? Is pikuach nefashos now, or do we project what could be? Well, says Rav Ashri, take a look at the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, the bottom piece, the number 4. A choyle, somebody is sick on Yom Kippur, and the choyle says, I need to eat. If I don't eat, I'm going to die. And the doctor says, you don't need to eat. Nothing will happen to you if you don't eat. What's the halacha? You listen to the choyle. You listen to the ill person. Why? Says the Gemara, Leiv yoidea moras nafshoy. Everybody knows the pain of their heart. You know better than the doctor. Doesn't matter how many years of schooling the doctor has. If you think you're going to suffer, you're going to endanger your life by not eating, we trust you. Then the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, what if you say you don't need to eat, and the doctor says you do need to eat? Says the Gemara, you listen to the doctor. Ask the Gemara, why would you listen to the doctor? Don't you know better? Says the Gemara, no. Tunvahu denokat le. Maybe you're delirious. Maybe you think you don't need to eat, but your mind, you're hallucinating. So either way, we listen to the doctor and we listen to you. Both lakula. The Rosh then brings down an opinion. What's considered sakanas nefashos? The Rosh says there are those who say, what's sakanas nefashos? If the doctor says that if you don't eat on Yom Kippur, you should know, if you don't eat on Yom Kippur, the doctor says, then tonight, the Matzah Yom Kippur, you're not going to go be buying a lulav and esrog. You're not going to go build your sukkah. You know what you're going to be doing Matzah Yom Kippur? You're going to be laying there unconscious, and the Chevra Kadisha is going to be washing you. That's what's going to happen to you if you don't eat on Yom Kippur. Only then, says the Rosh in the name of some Rishonim, only that is pikuach nefashos. But says the Rosh, nah, I don't buy that. That's not pikuach nefashos. No doctor is going to tell anybody, you have to eat on Yom Kippur, and if you don't eat today, you're going to drop dead a second after Yom Kippur is over. No doctor knows that. Nobody would ever say that. It's not true. Nobody would ever die from just not eating on Yom Kippur. Says the Rosh, pikuach nefashos is that if you don't eat on Yom Kippur, it could weaken you, and that it could ultimately bring you to a situation where your life will be endangered. If a doctor says to a chayla, look, if you don't eat, it could lower your resistance, it could bring you to a level where you're endangering your life. Says the Rosh, that is pikuach nefashos. And by the way, says Rav Ashri, the Torah concurs with the Rosh, and therefore halachically, what do we see from here? Definition of pikuach nefashos is not, if you don't do this, you're going to die immediately. Pikuach nefashos is even projected into the future. If you don't eat the food, it could weaken you, and it could bring to a situation where your life will be in danger. That's also going lefashes. And therefore, says Rav Ashri, yes, these people working in the airport, if they don't eat today, nothing will happen. If they don't eat tomorrow, nothing will happen. But if they're going to be resistant of eating the tray food, their systems are going to be weakened, they're going to be endangering their life. They're going to be putting themselves in a situation where their life is endangered. Says Rav Ashri, I told them they need to eat the food. They need to eat the pigle soup. Says Rav Ashri, but maybe you'll make the following case. It's not exactly parallel to this situation. Why not? Because when the doctor tells the Choyle on Yom Kippur, you need to eat, and if you don't eat, your systems could be weakened, and it could bring to Bikuach Nefashos. Right now, the person, even though his life is not on the line, right now he's a Choyle Chach. At least he's something, he's ill. So since he's ill, and the illness could get worse, and it could ultimately lead to Sakanas Nefashos, so that's called Pikuach Nefesh. But if you have a healthy person, who says that we could start projecting that if you don't eat the food, you're going to become unhealthy and your life will be endangered? It's a completely different scenario. You could only prove that we project into the future about someone who right now is considered a chayla. But you don't have any proof that we're going to project into the future someone who's a bari, someone who's a healthy person. So says Rav Ashi, I think I found a clear proof in Shas. Again, like every matter of halacha, people say, I have this feeling about this issue. It's very nice. You're entitled to your feelings, but it has nothing to do with halacha. There is almost no issue in Judaism that there's not a Gemara from which we derive a clear response. I feel. You ever learn krisus? So how do you know the answer to the question? Not in krisus. What do you mean you feel? What do you feel based on? I feel based on social issues that in America in 2015. Okay, if you learn Shas with Rashi and Tosfos and the Rosh and the Rambam, then probably there's an answer somewhere there. There's no touchy-feely about any matters in Judaism, these included. Says Rav Ashri, if we don't have a precedent from Shas that you can allow the people to eat, it's not a matter of educated guessing. But he says, I think I do have a clear proof in Shas that it would be permitted for these people to eat, and that's the following Gemara, famous Gemara Masechta Shabbos, Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna. But if you want to follow along around page 2, we're about 3/4 of the way down on the right-hand side. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, a guy's walking in the desert, he's far darbin in the desert, he's lost, he doesn't know where he is, he doesn't know what planet he's on, he doesn't know what day of the week it is. He lost track of time, there's no service to his phone, or maybe he doesn't have Verizon or something, right? I'm not going to insult your phone company this time, okay? He doesn't have service. So, he doesn't know, is it Sunday, is it Monday, is it Tuesday, what should he do? Says the Gemara brings down the opinion of Rav Huna, he counts 6 days, and the 7th day, he keeps as Shabbos. Says the Gemara, what is he allowed to do during the week? He can only do the bare minimum. So on Sunday, the day he thinks is Sunday, the day he counts as one, let's say he knows to keep alive, he needs 1 slice of pizza and 2 pieces of sushi. Let's say he knows that's what will keep him alive in one day. Anything more, he doesn't need. Anything less, he'll die. So he's only allowed to work to make that amount of food. And after he makes that amount of food, he's not allowed to do any malacha. Why? Because it might be Shabbos. He can't work for Monday, and then Monday comes along, and he's allowed to work for whatever he needs to keep himself alive for Monday, and no more. And then Tuesday comes along, he's like, fine. And then on Shabbos, he can't work at all. So Gemara asks, what should he do on Shabbos? Drop dead? Gemara says, no. Shabbos, he could also work the bare minimum to keep himself alive. So then the Gemara asks, if he could work on Sunday, and work on Monday, and work on Tuesday, and work on Wednesday, so then he's doing the same thing every day of the week. What's weekday and what's Shabbos? So Gemara says there's no difference. The only difference is on Shabbos he makes Kiddush, and on Shabbos he makes Havdalah. Okay, that's the halacha l'maisa. So say the Achronim. The Achronim continue. The Achronim say, what if you happen to have some food in your backpack? Then the first day you can't work. And if you have a little more food, then you can't work the second day until you need the food. What if you're a strong guy and you could survive one day of fasting? You could fast one day. Should you fast one day? So there is an Achroin. He quotes the Sefer Tosfos Shabbos. Tosfos Shabbos holds that if you could survive fasting one day, fast for one day. However, Kemat, all the Achroinim argue, the Big Day Yesha says, no. Even if you could fast one day, don't fast. Get out of that Fardarbana desert as quickly as possible, because every day you're there, you're endangering your life. Yeah, but today, I'm a healthy guy. I'm not ill. I'm not sick. I'm not endangered. So why shouldn't the guy fast that day? So says Rav Asher, you see from here that it's not only for the sick person, not only for the choile, that you start projecting into the future what will be if they don't eat the food. It's even a healthy person. It's not a matter, we don't look at your situation now, we determine based on what could be in the future. And if you continue this way, you could lead yourself to a situation where you're endangering your life, sakanas nefashos, and therefore Rav Ashri paskined that these people, they could be robust, they could be healthy, even if they're not a choile. If they're going to keep up this chumrah, this tzidkus of not eating the tray food, ultimately it's going to harm them, then starting on day one already, they need to eat the tray food. And says Rav Ashri, you should know, I spoke to the Goyin of Kovna, Rav Dov Bar Kahana Shapiro, and he also was maskim, lahalacha, that when it comes to Pikuach Nefashos, we don't look at you now, we project what it could lead to. Okay. Then, you take a look, question number 3. This is in number 5 on your sheets. A lot of people working in the airport, and the people working in the airport, they would beat them, they would torture them, they would kill them. And someone had an opportunity to get a job in the kitchen. He's going to be one of the pigle soup cooks. And he's going to be sitting there in the kitchen, eating that yabuska soup. Now, if you're in the kitchen, first of all, conditions were much better. You can have as much of that wretched soup as you like. And you have a much better shot at surviving. The problem is, first of all, you're going to have to be cooking Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. You can be Mechal Shabbos. The halacha is, if you cook on Shabbos, intentionally, you can't eat it, no Jew could eat it. If you cook b'shoigeg, nobody could eat that soup on Shabbos. So, very nice, he's going to be getting a comfortable job with the pigle soup. Number one, it's going to cause him to Mechal Shabbos. Number 2, could he even eat the soup that he cooks on Shabbos? And to that, Rav Ashi recommended, try as hard as you can to get the job in the kitchen. It's pikuach nefashos mamish. Now listen carefully. If somebody's life is on the line and they do malacha, it's not an Isser Dairais anymore. Why not? Because if the reason you're doing a malacha is not because you want to do the malacha, it's because you want to save your skin. So you're doing the malacha for a different reason. It becomes what is called malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. It's only Isser Drabanan. And b'chlal, it's not even Isser Drabanan, it's sakanas nefashos. So says Rav Ashri, get the job in the kitchen, eat as much soup as you can, and there's no prohibition and there's nothing wrong with eating the soup on Shabbos. You're forced to do it. And that is quite obvious. Very painful question is in Chilek Aleph Siman Tesvav. In number 6 on the sheets, this question came up, Aleph Nisan Tafshin Beis, 1942. And the question was, the only way certain Jews felt they would be able to save their life is if they got fake papers. Now, we're not talking about getting a passport of a non-Jew or a visa of a non-Jew. We're talking about a specific kind of paper. Conversion papers. Are you allowed to get a paper that says that you've forsaken the Jewish religion, you converted to Christianity, to save your life? You're not going to serve Avodah Zarah. You're going to be Mamin Bashem. You're going to keep all you're going to do is get a document that says you converted, and upon need, you're going to present it. Says Rav Ashri, it's Aser. It's Yehareg V'al Yavar. Again, we're not talking about could they have done it, why did they do it. We don't even understand how they lasted 1 second. We're talking about in the strict halachic sense. Cannot get a paper that says you convert to another religion. Why? Says Rav Ashri, the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvos that there's a mitzvah d'oraisa of l'kadesh Shem Hashem, to sanctify the name of God, which means, says Rav Ashri, says the Rambam, that we are commanded to spread as much as possible the true belief of Hashem in the world. And you cannot even say something to a Gentile to trick him into thinking that you've forsaken the true God, because that is a chilul Hashem. And for that it's Yehareg V'al Yavar. And therefore, says Rav Ashri, in this situation, it is not, unfortunately, permitted to get any kind of paper that declares that a Jew has forsaken their religion to join another faith. But everybody knows the Ramah says that if a guy asks you point blank, what religion do you belong to? There are ways of squeezing out of it, halachically. However, even the Ramah says very clearly, that is only if you say something that could have two connotations. Where you say one thing and the guy understands you to be saying you're a Gentile, but what you really mean to be saying is you're a Jew. But if it is clear as day that what you're saying is that I am no longer a member of the Jewish faith, everybody agrees it's not permitted to do that. In fact, the Chavetz Chaim Paskin in the Sefer Nidchei Yisrael, that if the only way you could save your life is to say, I am not a Jew, Chavetz Chaim Paskin's Halacha L'maisa, Yehareg V'al Yavar. Okay, we're not talking about visas, we're not talking about passports, we're talking about conversion papers now. Says Rav Ashri, it would not be permitted halachically. Now, very interestingly, many times when people would come to Rabbanim, and I'll show you later, and ask them Sha'alos, you know what the Rabbanim would say? Do what you want. And they would be pressed, but Rabbi, tell me what I should do. I want to know, what does that Torah say? And the people would say, if you don't tell me, I'm going to take that as a no. And the Rav would say, make believe you never asked me. So now we're not dealing with what the Rabbanan said there. We're dealing with objectively, just philosophically. What would the halacha be in a strict sense? The halacha is you cannot use a conversion paper even to save your skin. Another heart-wrenching question, terrible question. Gimel Nisan, Daled Nisan, Tavshin Daled, 1944. Word spread that the Germans were conducting Kinderaktion. They were going to be wiping out all the children in Lithuania. Unfortunately, they did a very good job in Lithuania. As good of a job as they did in Poland and in Hungary, the best job they did is in Lithuania. Not so many people who could say, yeah, I come from Lithuanian descent. Yeah, there are, but it's not. Most people, they come from Russia, from Poland, from Hungary. And the question is, the Jews had three ways to save their children. Number one, they're going to take the baby, they're going to put a little bag under the bassinet, and they're going to put in the knapsack, this kid was born to Gentile parents, and they abandon him. That's the only way, and leave the kid either by the home of a Gentile or by a monastery. So the only way they would be able to save their children, to write on a piece of paper, this child is a Gentile, the parents can't care for them anymore. Or, many Jews wanted just to take their kids, give them to the monastery, give them to the priest. And the third eitzah was, could we take the kid, bring him to the guy, and say, look, we hope we'll survive, we hope we'll see you again. Please take care of my child until I return, but not knowing if one would ever return. What does the question come down to? Question comes down to the following. Children are not obligated in mitzvos. And another thing you should know is that when it comes to the fast of Tisha B'Av, Shavas B'Tammuz, Asar B'Teves, Tzom Gedalia, at least as far as I know for Ashkenazim, there is no chinuch on Tanesim. Rav Shlomo Zalman says there are 3 things that people think you have to do 3 times. And they're all wrong. All 3 of them are wrong. One of the things that people think you have to do 3 times is that a kid has to fast 3 times before his bar mitzvah. There's no such thing. At least not in Judaism. That's what Rav Shlomo Zalman. You don't train a kid to fast Tisha B'Av. He wants to fast an hour in the morning. That's what Rav Shlomo Zalman said. I don't know about this. I can't tell you about this farther. I'm not sure. I believe it's the same thing. And the question is, children don't have an independent mitzvah of any mitzvah. It's only chinuch on the parent. Is a child included in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem? Would a child have to sacrifice their life to sanctify God's name? And you could say, would a child who does risk his life, is that even sanctifying the name of Hashem? Is a child in the Parsha of Kiddush Hashem? There is an amazing Rambam. The Rambam says in Parches, Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, a lashon that is unique in all of the writing of the Rambam. Kol Beis Yisrael Mitzuvin al Kiddush Hashem. The entire house of Israel, the entire Jewish people, is included in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. The Rambam usually says, Mitzuvin Yisrael, the Kiddush Hashem. What's Kol Beis Yisrael? The Rambam nowhere, ever says Kol Beis Yisrael. By the way, if you look in the Emes Liyaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, on Parshas Kedoshim, I believe. And in many of the Mefarshim on the Rambam, they're all medayik the same thing. The Lashon of Kol Beis Yisrael proves that even children are in the Parsha of Kiddush Hashem. In other words, if a child has such a holy neshama that they are offering to sacrifice their life for the sake of God, a child has the ability to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. Even another point, another proof to this, is that we know that if it's something in public, that even if it's not one of the big 3, even if it's not one of the cardinal 3, but if it's a public sin, in front of 10 people, you have to give up your life not to violate. What type of people constitute a public? How? You have 10 people. What if you have 8 adults and 2 kids? Is that a minyan for Kiddush Shamayim? Yes. Rabbeinu Tam says you don't need Gedolim, even Ketanim. Why? Because even Ketanim are in the Parsha of Kiddush Hashem. And the proof is there are a number of very interesting proofs. One is from a Medrash in Eicha. The Medrash in Eicha says as following, that there was a certain general who wanted a woman and her 7 sons to bow down, and she wouldn't bow down, and the oldest wouldn't bow down, and the next one bow down, and the next. And finally there's this little child, and the mother had to rip him off from nursing. And the general says to the child, will you bow down? And the child was Moiser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. So we see from here that the inyan of Kiddush Shem Shamayim is not limited to Gedah. It's the only mitzvah in the Torah that a child is part of. Another proof. A timely proof. Gemara says in Gittin, Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis, 400 boys and girls were being taken to Rome to be violated. And when they got wind of what was going to happen to them, first the girls asked the following question, little girls, if we commit suicide, will we have chelek ba'olam haba? And they darshan, yes, mi bashan ashiv, mi bashan will seek you out on the bottom of the sea and reconstitute your molecules and bring you into Gan Eden. And the girls jumped off the boat, and then the boy said the following, what would be so terrible if these girls were violated? After all, it's against their will and it's a natural way. How will we be violated? Shaloi kederech? Said the boys, if the girls jump over, we're going to give up our life not to be violated. Something that the Supreme Court of the United States doesn't understand. Little Yiddish kinderlach were Moiser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. 5-year-olds understood. Look how twisted the world has become. Look how twisted the world has become. Something that little Yiddish kinderlach gave up their lives for, people are unsure about today. people are open-minded to. What a churban we live in. What a churban we live in. But says Rav Ashri, what we see from here is that even children are included in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And therefore he paskins to give over a child to a monastery, to a guy, to a kaimer. You have to be Moiser Nefesh HaKiddush Hashem. You cannot give up the child if the child is going to be raised to be a member of another faith. However, what if you go to the guy and you say, do me a favor, watch my kid. Watch my kid. I'll be back. Not knowing if you'll ever be back. Says Rav Ashri, under these circumstances, I told them they're obligated to do it. Why? Ein safek moitzi midei vadai. Because in Lithuania, if you hold on to your children, it's not 80%. It's not 90%. It's not 99%. No children survive. And if you give it to the guy, who knows? Says Rav Ashri, maybe you'll make it through. And even if you don't make it through, maybe your brother will take your kid back. Maybe your cousin will take your kid back. All of Klal Yisrael are chaverim. Says Rav Ashri, we know what happened after the war. Many Rabbanim would go into these homes and they would snatch and take back Yiddish Kinderlach. So, my grandfather writes in his memoirs that after the war, Rav Herzog went to the Pope and he said, could you issue a statement that all the monasteries, all the Gentiles should relinquish their Jewish... Wouldn't listen. But many Rabbanim were successful in retrieving many of the Kinderlach. And therefore Rav Ashri paskined, under those circumstances, it would be permitted. Okay, let's do one more before the final one. This next one we'll try to do very briefly. It's a question about Mesiras Nefesh. Whether everybody knows for the big three, for the cardinal three, a person is obligated to risk their life. For another mitzvah, a person not allowed to risk their life. Let's say a guy comes to you, he says, look, you see this Hugo Boss suit, which is mole shatnez. Every stitch in this suit is shatnez. Put it on now, otherwise you got to put on the suit. What if you want to be Moiser Nefesh? You're not allowed to be Moiser Nefesh. The Rambam says, it's like you committed suicide. Were they permitted to risk their life to learn Torah, to teach Torah barabim, to daven with minyanim? Or maybe they shouldn't have? How do we view that? So there's a very long discussion here, and for the sake of brevity, Rav Ashri says that it certainly could be considered a shas shmad. It was a time where the Germans didn't want to just obliterate our bodies, but they wanted to obliterate the source of our hope, which was, who did they go after first? They went after the Admoirim, they went after the Rosh Yeshiva, they went after the Rabbanim. Somebody told me that in the Aguda archives, there's a telegram that they were able to intercept that Hitler sent to his armies and to his officers. You kill the rabbis first, because if they ever survive, they're going to start this up again, somewhere else. So obviously, the fact that they went after the Admoirim and the Rosh Yeshiva, they were after our souls as well. It's a shas hashmad. And it would be permitted to risk one's life to study Torah, to daven, and in fact, many Yidden did. And Rav Ashri says, I'm included. I continued teaching Torah barabim, I continued orchestrating minyanim, and he brings proof from Daniel, in Sefer Daniel. We find that Daniel risked his life to daven, even though there was a decree that anyone who would pray would be killed by the king. And the Rav Ashri comes to the following conclusion. You can't tell any individual that they're obligated to risk their life to fulfill a specific mitzvah. It really depends on what one's kavanah is. If a person has kavanah l'shem shamayim, to uphold the religion. But any Jew who feels the cause and feels the desire to mekadesh shem shamayim, kadesh yamar lai, in that tekufa, in that epic period, it was permitted for them to risk their life. So I just want to conclude by telling you about one of the most heart-wrenching Sha'alos in this whole tragic period. And this question was brought to Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels. Tzvi Hirsch Meisels authored a sefer called Sha'alos Tshuvos Mekadshei Hashem. Tzvi Hirsch Meisels was the Av Bezdin, Naimark, and then Bergen-Belsen, and then finally later on in Chicago. And the following question came to him. He said, an Oberlander Yid came to him and asked him with great tamimos, with great simplicity, he said, Rebbe, I have one son, my only son. He's as dear to me like the pupil of my eye. And he's being incarcerated together with 1,400 young men. 1,400 young men. And they're being sent to the crematoria. And I could bribe the capos, and I could get him out. Problem is that if I take him out, they're going to have to replace him with another young man. Halacha l'maisa, Rebbe, am I allowed to bribe the capos and save my son at the expense of another yid? And says Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, I begged him, please don't ask me that question. You can't ask me that question. This question would have to be posted to the Sanhedrin HaGadol. This is Dinei Nefashos. I'm only one Rav. And here I am in Auschwitz. I have no Sfarim. I don't have Yeshiva Das. I can't deal with this question. He said it's one thing if you would bribe the capos, and now the capos would then have to go search and find someone in his place. Maybe you could say, you know what, maybe these Rishaim, these capos, maybe at the last moment they would say to themselves, you know what, once I freed a Yid, I'm not allowed to replace him with somebody else. That's Ritzicha. Like the Gemara says in Ksubis, that if a woman is caught trying to give her husband tray food, and the husband wants to divorce her, the halacha is you still have to pay her the Ksuba, because the wife could say, nah, at the last moment, in the 11th hour, I never would have done it. In the last moment, the Pintel Yid would have been awakened in me. I never would have fed it to him. So too here, if the kapos would then have to go search for a replacement, you could say, you know what, maybe they'll do tshuva and they won't find someone. But everybody knows how the kapos work. The way they work is that if they don't find a replacement, the blood is on their hands. They're going to be killed. And they make sure to find the replacement before they let anybody off the hook. And therefore I beg you, my dear friend, don't ask me the question. I beg you. I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you a half a thing. I can't even think about it. He says, but Rebbe, whatever you paskin, if you tell me I can't do it, that's the din Torah, makabel b'yava. And he said, no. That's not what I said. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm telling you, I can't say, Rebbe, if you're not going to say, I'm going to take that as a psak that I can't do it. Said, no. You're putting words into my mouth. I didn't tell you that. Make believe you don't know that I exist. Make believe you never asked me. Rebbe, I see from your hesitation that in your eyes it's not borrower that I'm allowed to do it. I take that as a psak din, that this is asur. No, I beg you, to make believe that you don't know who I am. Rebbe, enough said. The din Torah is that it's forbidden for me to redeem my son. And if this is the din Torah, then I'm moiser my son l'sreifa al pi hadin. Because that's what the halacha paskins. And this was Rosh Hashanah, Tavshin Beis. And the whole day this man on Rosh Hashanah was singing besimcha that he was zoiche to be makriv like Akedas Yitzchak, his son, on the Mizbeach. That Avram Avinu, he was told by the Rebbeinu Shalom, I don't even have to be told. If my Rebbe doesn't want to give me a heter, then it's asur. Says Rav Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, my dear brothers who are reading my words, there's no question in my mind that the actions of this man made a big stir in the heavens. And on that Rosh Hashanah, we were zoiche to be makriv Akedas Yitzchak mamish. just to be able to hear the tzidkus and the tamimos of a yid who not only was willing to ask a shaila under the most trying conditions, but sometimes, you ask your Rav a question, but I really need to. And here this yid didn't even need to hear the answer. He was able to see on the face, he was able to read in between the lines. And the tzidkus and the zechuyos of all of these yidden, because if you look, all of these yidden who pose these questions, they're Hashem Yimkoim Damam. All of their zechusim should go up to Shamayim, should be Melitze Yesharim, the Mirz Hashem, Tzayim HaRavi, V'tzayim HaChamishi, V'tzayim HaShvi, V'tzayim HaSiri, Yiyah, L'Beis Yehuda, L'Sasayin, L'Simcha, L'Mayadim Toivim, we should be Zaycha to Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Herav Yameinu.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.